just a little bit of background. Sid has asked me, and I must confess to you, I'm assuming since he asked me, that this, what I've been asked to speak on quite briefly, is, I want to promise you that, over lunch speakers should be brief. I don't know whether this is actually germane or not, but it is something I have some passion about. And that has to do with trying to create the kind of environment that is welcoming for young adults in the life of our church. As a dad, as well as priest and now bishop, this has been incredibly important to me because my kids, to speak really frankly, have been both the beneficiary as well as the, what's the right word? They've been on the short end of the stick, depending on how the church where we went treated young people. And I mean, I can say with some gratitude to God that all 5 of our boys are Christians. But I also would want to say, to speak really honestly, that they're all over the map in terms of their spiritual life and journey. With 2 or 3 of them who are deeply, passionately committed Christians and who are actively involved in some local Christian expression. The personal shopper from J. Crew, who is also a contemporary worship leader at his local congregation in New York City. And of course the priest, who's in Durham, England. Yes, he is a Christian. and really loves what he's doing because he's doing biblical studies. To others who would say something to the effect of, I don't understand why I have to be as committed as you are. And that has everything to do with his church experience. Everything. I mean, I can look at high caliber youth ministries and young adult ministries, some of which has been in some of the places where we've served, seen the fruit of it positively. And I've been in other places where the ministry's not been so good or absent, or there's been no effort to try to include and welcome them into our church family. And they clearly and obviously get the impression that they're an afterthought, and that's how they think about it now that they're young adults. So I've sort of seen the whole, but as you know, we're a quickly, precipitously aging denomination. I mean, I really saw it not too long ago when I went to a Cursillo closing in this diocese, and the average age of people going to Cursillo at this point is 61 in the Diocese of Central Florida. Now, some of that has to do with the fact that we're a retirement backup, but some of it is to do is that there's nothing that's going on right now in that movement that's trying to in any way pitch itself to a young adult population. There's a book, if you're really interested in this subject, I would recommend a book. It's called Unchristian. It is by a man named Gabriel Lyons and David Kingman. They do it together. But if you Google Unchristian, and you'll get it. It has its own website. Gabriel Lyons and David Kingman took some Barna studies on young people as they relate to church, and basically did a whole thick, it's not terribly thick, but it's an in-depth study about what do young adults actually think about when they think about a local congregation. And I want to tell you, as the name of the book implies, it is not good news. We are, even in a statistical way as a country, the fastest rising group of people are the spiritual, non-religious affiliates. That's where a lot of our adult population is going. So that no longer is the system on which we were based, which is you send young adults to a 3-year residential degree program. You teach them primarily the basic disciplines of Episcopal Anglican church life, and if you have a decent building and your choir's good and the sermons are decent, then you'll get people to come. That's actually almost not true anymore. It's true in some places, but they're getting fewer and fewer and fewer and fewer. And quite honestly, and I really saw this when I lived in New York City, but it didn't contradict my experience in other places as well, so it's not like, oh yeah, well that's New York. You can say that about a lot of things that are in New York. Oh yeah, that's New York. But this was true. Most young adults really view us as irrelevant. Oh, I'm glad you like that sort of thing. And that's people like me, are not the people most young adults would think to go to if they had any profoundly serious spiritual questions. because we're irrelevant. And the rap about the church, what they say, is, yeah, that's for older adults, that doesn't mean anything to me. I've got some spiritual questions, but I'm really not, they don't really know where to go. And yes, there are a few mostly independent, mostly charismatic congregations that are exploding with young adult growth. For me, the most vivid example is this thing out of Australia called Hillsong. And that are, I went to a Hillsong service in New York City. There were 1,000 people present. That was only one of their 4 services. And everybody, I was easily the oldest guy by about 30 years. I stood out like a sore thumb. And so there are some churches that are doing an exceptional job about reaching young adults. But even the whole ancient future trend, if you've heard anything about this among some young adults, wanting the contemplative, more kind of chant-oriented, it gets a lot of names, whether you're talking Celtic spirituality, you're really talking about an appeal base to a very, very, very select and small population. They do exist, but they are not mainstream. And so, and here's the dilemma. The dilemma is, and I've seen it, when a young adult actually walks into church, they're in a world that is entirely foreign. They've never listened to the music that we sing at all. It used to be that most educated adults had some sense of classical music. Well, symphonies are dying in a lot of places now. It's hard to find a good classical music station on a lot of radios unless you've got Sirius or something like that. There's a reason this is going on. There's a reason why the MTV Awards are nationally, internationally televised, and concerts by the New York Philharmonic are not. This is the age in which we live. So the music is foreign. They've never been in a kind of liturgical setting that is our bread and butter. I love this stuff. Please know, I'm not throwing stones. I'm in the system. As a bishop, I would never have accepted this position if I was going to try to be some kind of iconoclast when it comes to this. I'm a classically trained pianist. I love the music. So I'm just trying to think about this through the lens of the young adults with whom I've had regular contact, including my own sons. And so the cadence of the language is unfamiliar, the music is unfamiliar, and more often than not, they don't know how to get in even if they like it. Just not too long ago, I don't want to say any more than that because I live here, I went to a meeting of clergy, and a young man came in with his grandmother so that she could attend a morning prayer service at their church. And she knew everybody. He didn't know a soul. And I was there along with some other people, and I walk into a parish hall sort of place, and she's sitting with her friends chatting and having coffee. There may be 30 people in the room. He's way over here, and he's not talking to a soul. How in the world does that allow him to have any sense of being welcomed at all? So that's what I did. I sat down and I talked with him. We had actually a terrific conversation. I'm now praying for a young man named Brandon. And but they don't always get that when they come into the life of a local church. And plus, there is a prejudicial caricature that is very prevalent in our culture that makes it even more difficult for them to bridge the gap. Whether you're talking about the kind of caricatures that you see about Christians that are in the media, the church lady at Saturday Night Live, or you fill in the blank, whomever that might be, to, Christians are not very well thought of. If you watch the TV, my God, we're crazy. We use religious language to really cover up just onerous, disgusting behavior. Whether you're talking about The Closer or Law and Order or it's almost a popular caricature in culture. So if a young adult sees that and has no personal experience at church, if the language is foreign, if the music is foreign, if they're not feeling particularly welcome, and more importantly, they look out in the congregation or up front and they don't see anybody like them, why would they want to come? Why? I mean, there's got to be people who look like you if you're going to walk into a congregation and feel welcome. There has to be some affinity at some level or another. And so, and more often than not, all of that is symptomatic. It's not just a question of thinking about different styles of music, for example, or livening the liturgy. A lot of that can actually come across as trite. Or their word, that's really cheesy, Dad. In some of that kind of innovation. I really think it has everything to do, at its symptomatic heart, at an absence of vision for mission. Because the old model was the responsibility of people like me is to pastorally care for the people who show up. That's our job. That's our number one job. Everything else is secondary to that. And therefore, out of that, we might take on some kind of outreach project together, whether we're talking about, food pantry or, we all have those kinds of things in our churches. Worthwhile, worth doing. But there is none of that that basically says we actually exist in part for the people who are not here. And that's a missionary mandate that we have from God. God has not called us to be, in essence, a pastoral enclave. That's a misreading of our Christian tradition. And there is a reason why Jesus says, go make disciples of all nations. There is a reason that we have this incredible heritage that we go through in holy men and holy women with these adventurous souls that do out-of-the-box incredible things in a way that literally changes the course of history for a community or for a group of people. We hold those people up because, as we used to sing, some of us, and I mean to be one too, right? And so, but that's not on the screen for, unfortunately, many of our clergy who've been trained up in that old system. That was what I got at Virginia Theological Seminary eons ago. That we'd have a nice building, I had to be a decent preacher, if I knew how to talk to people, and I showed up at the hospitals, I'd be okay. Or as a high church friend of mine said one, I really thought priesthood was basically for people. You know what I thought it was, he said? I thought my job was to say Mass and be kind to people. And it's just not true. It's partially true, but it's just not true. And so I don't know what it will take for congregations to begin to ask the question, who's not in the room and what do we do about it? And understand that that's not just being sort of clever or observant. It's in fact responding to a missionary priority. Because see, I believe with all my heart that if that begins to get into the DNA of a staff or a congregation, that we really are existing for people who are not here, and how do we build those connections, that I believe that God will begin to give individual congregations the kinds of strategy stuff that they need to begin to think in a creative way about how to do that kind of outreach. It may or may not reshape what you do in church on Sunday morning. I mean, contemporary Christian worship done poorly is actually more of a turnoff than doing Bach well. And I've done both of those. I've been a contemporary worship leader, and I've sung tenor and an a cappella madrigal. So it's not just an issue of musical style. It has everything to do with a welcoming heart. Do you hear that? It's not about a musical style. It has everything to do with a welcoming heart. That God gives a congregation so that they begin to see, it's the old biblical question, who is my neighbor? And to know that that demographically changes. So I sit down now with the dean of the cathedral in Orlando and say, a new urban center is developing in the city of Orlando. You've got all these hipster young adults who are buying and fixing up the old homes and getting into condos. I don't see them here on Sunday morning. What are you going to do about that? What are you going to do about that? Because in some ways, that's the dean's responsibility. It would be the same with Father Al, the rector here. As he surveys the city of Lakeland, and this church is continuing to emerge as a city church, not just a small regional congregation, which is what it was when he came here. Kudos to Father Al. The question still continues to be raised, even in the midst of this kind of success. Who's not in the room? How do we reach out to them? I really do believe in the old-fashioned parish system, that this is a parish that God gives us, not merely a congregation that exists inside of the four walls of our church on Sunday. That's a part of the success of classical Anglicanism, was thinking about a parish, meaning a geographic region, and understanding that whether they go to my church or not, I still bear some spiritual responsibility. And what am I going to do about that? What is God asking me to do about that? That could connect you into doing some really interesting things, like, for example, I have a wonderful guy in Titusville named Rob Goodrich, St. Gabriel's, small family church. They have like 5 or 6 young adults, meaning high school students. Well, that's true for the Methodist Church, the Presbyterian Church, like 5 or 6 churches in the very small community of Titusville, more small than ever because of the decimation of the space industry. So what he did was that he went around and said, what if we do youth group together? And they pulled a team together, and they now have over 50 high school students showing up on a weekly basis in this combined effort. See, I think it's not an issue of size. I think it's an issue of vision. Because it's not a question of resources, it's a question of vision. I mean, for example, when I took a brand new mission congregation, 35 people on Sunday in a new suburban area, and I thought, I used to drive around the community. I still do that, even now as a bishop. I used to drive around the community and say, well, who's really here? Who's moving in? Because they were literally people from all over the country who were moving in, brand new people from Wisconsin and Pittsburgh and all kinds of people, definitely not Central Florida. And they didn't know a soul because they were brand new moving into the area. And the one thing I noticed, and I really believe that God sort of opened my eyes to it, I saw high school and junior high school students in this suburban development roaming in packs. And I thought, that's what we need to do. So literally the first thing we did before I got a secretary was that we put a little bit of money together to have a part-time youth director. That was the first staff person that we hired. Yeah, we had some other volunteers, but we knew that that was the key to reaching that neighborhood. We were this crazy place. I mean, to tell you, this was a little congregation that had been seeded by 4 other churches. And who showed up were people who had chips on their shoulders about the churches they left, and they sure as heck didn't want to be like their church that they left. So, I mean, these are ornery people, I want you to know. And so lots of rough edges. And we'd feel it all the time. It was like being on an emotional roller coaster being in this church. And I would have to say to newcomers, this may not be your place. It's an intense life here. Are you willing to be a part of that? If so, we'd love to have you. But for all you know, next week somebody could be in jail and we'll all know about it. Is that okay with you? I mean, good, true story. And so what they would say was, they'd come with their kids, because their kids heard about some of the stuff that we were doing. And they said, this wouldn't have been my choice, but my kids like it. And that's how we went from 35 to 350 on a Sunday morning. But you see, that was the key that God gave us for that neighborhood. It's different someplace else. It may be that, like, for example, I'm working with a congregation whose neighborhood is now completely Latin American. And I'm saying, what are you doing to reach out to your neighbors? Because at this point, you're an Anglo enclave, and you're going to die in 20 years. So how are you going to reach out to your neighborhood? Because if you're not, we're going to sell it. And who will sell it to is probably a Latin American, Spanish-speaking Pentecostal church. The gospel will still be in your community, but it won't have the Episcopal name on it. Is that really what you want to do? And so we're working along those lines. It has everything to do with, God, what's the key to my neighborhood? How do I do it? Having that kind of welcoming heart. And then you allow that to begin to shape what you actually do, liturgically, musically, what your welcome programs look like, what kind of catechesis do you need, according to who's showing up in the door. All the things that we're actually pretty good at. But if it's not in here, if you're not asking the question, then you'll continue to be the irrelevant church that most young adults think of us as. And I'm fully committed for that not happening. I mean, this is what, I'm 61 years of age, unless they change the mandatory retirement age for bishops, which they might do because we're all getting older. I know I'm going to be in the saddle for at least 11 years. That's not a very lengthy amount of time. So I really feel under the gun. I want to make a difference in the life of Central Florida so that we're not irrelevant, but that instead we're growing, we're exploding in a way that would really allow the gift that God has given us in Anglicanism to rightfully take its place for the Christian community here in the Diocese of Central Florida. But to do that means we literally have to buck trends that have been going on now for decades. It is not easy work. But I want to say to you, it can in fact be done. This is not some pipe we're doing it. And we're not unique. Sure, our demographics are a little bit more that are different, but actually we have more retirees. We have more Latin Americans. We have this exploding Caribbean population. For you, it might be different. But the fact of the matter is, we believe those are the people that God saved in Central Florida. So in that light, what do we do? And it may be different for you. So that what we did at Calvary St. George's at 21st and Park Avenue in New York City was very different from what we did at Church of the Good Samaritan, suburban Paoli, Pennsylvania. It's not a question of, there's no Mecca. In other words, it's not, oh, I like that program. Instead, it's saying, God, give us the open heart. And then out of that, allow Him to begin to lead you so that God's creativity becomes the thing that you begin to receive. Because I believe with all of my heart, and this is where I'm closing, that this is the Spirit of God. God is a missionary God. And as we begin to say yes to that, God will give you all that you need to begin to reach your neighborhoods. So, welcoming heart. Who's not in the room? God, show us how we reach them. Give us the keys. And I believe with all my heart that He will. Thank you.